Yo, boys, welcome back to Star Spangled Gamblers. We are continuing on our election 2022 tour. I think we might, maybe we can fairly say we're going to be a little behind the scenes, but also right in the middle of the action at the same time. We love saying things that make a little bit of sense, but not a lot on this show. Anyway, joining me in the lab today is Albert Eisnberg. He is the principal of Blue State Red. Albert, I always do this thing at this point. I always just start saying things about a person, so I hope what I say is true. You self-identify as a millennial political strategist. You have roots in the Pennsylvania and South Carolina area, and your métier, if we can bring in some fancy words, is doing outreach campaigns to the people who don't usually vote for Republicans. I'm thinking like really heavily about these Latino voters that no one will shut up about, you know, are they shifting rightwards? Are they not? But I'm sure that your body of work is actually much more broad than that. So I'll stop talking for a second and let you introduce yourself to our audience. Who are you and why are you here?
Yeah, well, thanks, King Dog, Alex. My name's Albert Eisnberg, as you said, from Philadelphia area. And I guess I'm one of those people that grew up and thought, you know, I kind of dissent from all this progressive groupthink. Guys about our age remember, you know, what it was like to actually debate ideas openly and then having the situation change overall to kind of there's new dogma that we must live by. And I remember just calling bullshit when I was younger. So I started my career in digital advertising on the corporate side, agency side, kind of using that, all that new data that was being scraped by Facebook and other social platforms to advertise for brands towards people and kind of measure their actions. And I quickly sort of grew bored and discontent in my early 20s in New York and decided to start doing that freelance at first and then building my business off of it. So I use all the digital tools that we have at our disposal in this amazing and fragmented digital media world and try to help causes and campaigns that I care about reach their target audience, grow their target audience, and create methods to action. And specifically, like you said, I'm interested in reaching all those regular normie voters, many of whom are not Republicans, many of whom do not consider themselves Republicans or conservatives yet, and showing them a positive case for the conservative movement, for, you know, conserving what's good in our country, for example, and hopefully, you know, creating some engagement within GOP campaigns, within conservative causes, and building a bigger tent.
Okay. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to sell you to our audience who are psychotic degen beta males who bet on elections or at least really interested in what betting markets say about elections. Okay. So the whole hopes of the Republican Party are pinned on two things. I think I know where you come out on one of them. So one of the things is Donald Trump, which doesn't seem to be a winning bet lately. And the other thing is outreach, converting particularly Latinos and perhaps winning back Asians who Republicans have been losing for years, college-educated voters, women, to rebuild the big tent. So you are the guy who is in charge of having the vision to do this so that Republicans can win in places like Pennsylvania and Colorado and Arizona, where they have not been quite so competitive anymore. So we are going to talk about what you are doing right now, and our users can sort of draw their own conclusions about whether or not you are pursuing a strategy that will amount to gains this election. Did I put too much pressure on you there?
Well, I think you said I'm in charge of something, and if I'm in charge of anything, I've appointed myself.
Well, entrepreneurship.
I'm a, you know, quintessential, like the kid with the lemonade stand when I was 6. You know, that's just who I am. I will say one thing for trying to set the tone of the conversation. You know, there's a quiet shift happening, which a lot of your audience will be aware of, is that Democrats are swapping out working people of color, Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters for college-educated whites. And Republicans are quietly building a multiracial coalition, despite the fact that most Republicans don't even realize it yet.
So when I was writing opinion pieces that no one read, I think a line that I used was the parties are shifting so that Democrats represent sort of shareholders in big business and also really poor people, and Republicans represent shopkeepers and their hourly employees, basically. Does that feel right to you?
Yeah, I would make an amendment. I would add a major constituency to the Democratic Party, which is sort of under or overeducated, understimulated sort of millennial post grads
Yeah.
who are not shareholders in big business and are not really poor. A lot of them have family support. Yeah, and Republicans should seek to represent any normie voter, many of whom are non-white.
Okay. So like waiters with fishermen's beards in Portland, cat ladies in like vintage Def Leppard t-shirts. That's sort of what you're talking about.
Yeah, like pink pussy hat.
Yes.
People.
Yeah. The people drinking Bellinis after the Women's March, basically.
Literally protest and brunch.
Correct.
It's its own movement.
Okay. Well, okay. So then, enough of the easy questions. Let me just ask you the hard question, which is, does anyone care about what you're doing? Because if I'm a politician, I actually have this argument when I deal with politicians on the Republican side, which is all they really give a shit about is getting the votes on November 8th. Like they do not care about long-term projects and long-term visions. They just need 50% plus one on their election day. So like when you talk about growing the tent or this sort of grander vision for conservative politics, do people just tell you to fuck off ever? I mean, is it like, does anyone care?
Well, there's a lot to that question, which we could take a whole episode and just talk about that. I mean, it is true that at the base, every single political person, every single candidate cares about getting to 50 plus one on the day of the election. That's always going to be true. That's going to be true for Democrats, Republicans, whoever's running. But it is also true that there are some people that care about the ideas they're espousing, care to grow the movement. And sort of like I can care about what I'm going to eat for breakfast and what the meaning of life is. There are people who care about both. And I do think Republicans increasingly understand, particularly with Hispanic voters, that these are new members of our coalition and we need to reach, engage them, bring out candidates that are from these communities. But Republicans have come around far too slowly to the understanding that we need to represent the whole country. And a lot of the campaign conversations I have been infuriating over the years and the real coded word that you hear on the right a lot is these people vote against their own interests,
right?
Specifically with Black voters in cities, in rural areas. And it's really mind-boggling for me to say that because they never hear from Republicans. So why would they ever vote Republican? And we just completely abandoned enormous swaths of the country, and Democrats have too. They've completely abandoned, non-college educated whites, rural whites, and that's also wrong.
Well, but like, why would you care about those voters if you never see them? Like, it's like the old academic concept of like an imagined community. Well, how can you possibly imagine a community that's so different from your own? So, I think that's why it doesn't sink into people that the country, like if you're in Lackawanna County in Pennsylvania, that the country isn't all white boomers. Like it just wouldn't dawn on you because everyone kind of is. And likewise, if you live in Queens where people speak 30 different languages on your block, why would you think that the world's different somewhere else?
Well, you should care if you're a politician because you're ostensibly representing a lot of people that are different from you. Like you're one and you're representing a district of 300,000 people or whatever it is. You should care to know who's in the community.
This sort of macro seems like the beef between that you're reading about in Politico right now between Rick Scott and Mitch McConnell, where Rick Scott's like, we have to sell voters a plan, and now he's in a lot of hot water because it turns out it's hard to sell a plan. Whereas McConnell's
it's hard to sell a plan when you've created the plan yourself out of whole cloth and not vetted it with your team.
Right. Versus a more traditional strategy, which is just give voters like a reason to throw rocks at the people in power and they'll show up to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm for both. I think you should have a positive plan. And I think every voter needs to know, like, what does it mean to reduce inflation and costs at the grocery store and costs at the gas station, and also paint a clear contrast. I don't think negative is, on the Democrats is sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. That being said, the Rick Scott, roll this out without the full team behind it is stupid.
Right.
But you saw that. I mean, I don't know if you saw in Axios that Kevin McCarthy is going to kind of imitate Newt Gingrich in the 1994 red wave with his contract to America or contract for America. Kevin McCarthy on September 19th is going to roll out some specific policy proposals that every Republican congressional candidate can get behind.
That is a favorite move of House Republicans. I was there for the Pledge to America. Creative talent is not it's not particularly deep on the Republican side. I suspect you don't have a ton of competition, Albert.
They're really good, strong. There's really good graphic designers, there's good web people, there's good digital people, talented data people. As far as Republican messaging overall, it's just really poor. And we were completely outgunned by Democrats because Democrats have not only the entire political media almost behind them, they also have like fashion magazines, sports, pop culture, commercials, these soft ways of communicating political ideas to people unbeknownst to them.
Well, okay, so I'm going to get back to talking about betting on politics in a second here, but I have a long running conspiracy theory that's contrary to what you just said. And that long running conspiracy theory is that a lot of ideas that Democratic politicians line up behind are super unpopular and they don't know it because they're never criticized. So then you get Joe Biden in front of Independence Hall, like accusing Republicans of being like mass terrorist groups or something like that. And just blindsided when people are like, where did you come up with that?
Right.
So I think sometimes it does, like, media bias can work both ways.
It sort of inculcates them from criticism, so they go sounding off on anything.
Right. And then the voters criticize them. And,
yes.
So here we are.
But if you talk about, let's say black voters specifically, these are very loyal Democrats for the most part. 2/3 of them say that they're moderate or conservative. What an average Democrat says on the campaign trail should alienate 2/3 of black voters, but it doesn't because the messaging on the GOP side is so bad.
How does have you looked into I love an interview like this because I'm off script immediately because you're just interesting. So have you looked into, is there data about whether or not the sort of social justice language of Elizabeth Warren liberals, does that register with black voters, or does that seem kind of weird and preening?
It's very academic. I mean, my gut tells me no. My conversations, when I try and have conversations with as many people as possible whenever I can, tells me that regular working black people are upset about the rise of costs of things, are not, into biological men and biological women competing in the same athletic field, for example. And there's data, for example, on defund the police versus, support police presence in local communities where a super majority of black voters reject what the Democratic Party embraced, which is defund, and at its extremes, defund, prison abolition, thinking up new ways of incarceration, which means decarceration. I mean, this stuff is not making people more safe, and they are against it.
Yes.
They just don't view that as part and parcel with the Democratic Party. Whereas if Marjorie Taylor Greene says one crazy thing, every Republican is associated with it.
Okay. So let's pretend the election's over, and then maybe we can work our way backwards to some of this stuff. So it's November 9th, 2022. Maybe they're still counting ballots in Arizona or Colorado or maybe even Pennsylvania. But for the most part, we know the outcome of the election. So what do you think? I'm going to give you three choices here, but what do you think people are going to be saying on election day? Are they going to be saying, wow, those Republicans barely squeaked out a win in Congress. They did a little bit better with women and minorities, but it's sort of too soon to tell if, that's a trend or just a thing. Or maybe they're saying, wow, Democrats won. They kept the House, they kept the Senate. Republicans just couldn't play on the gender and generational issues because of that abortion ruling. Or maybe they'll say, wow, huge win for the Republicans. That whole Myra Flores, Rio Grande Valley Hispanic wave finally materialized. Do you think that we'll be living in one of these outcomes?
I think that there's going to be something for everybody after this election. I think there are a few very winnable Senate seats that Democrats might squeak out in New Hampshire and Arizona, for example, because of poor candidate choice. I think that Republicans are going to do very well in the U.S. House. And the more working class and the more Hispanic a district is or a state is, the more rightward it's going to shift, just like it did between 2018 and 2020. And I believe Republicans are probably going to make gains. I think the question for me is like, are we going to scrape out a win in like a Colorado Senate race that's really a stunner, or are both sides going to kind of divide the normal proceeds? I mean, I think Republicans are going to do well. We should be having a tsunami considering the economy in Afghanistan and everything else. And I think anything less than that's an indictment of Republican leadership.
But what makes you say this? Like, are you telling me this as someone who's running 400 different Facebook ad campaigns and seeing who's clicking and donating? Are you telling me this as someone who just reads the Washington Post? Like, what makes you think that this is the way it'll go down?
Well, partly internal polling that I've done for clients, specifically with Hispanic and Black voters, partly just kind of being a prognosticator and somebody who's following the polling. I mean, everyone who's familiar with your podcast probably knows what happened in the New York 19 special election. So Democrats are thinking, oh, we're going to be fine. Abortion's great. But that's an upper income, heavily white district. So I think Democrats will hold on in places like that.
So I'm obviously biased to agree with you on that, but I saw a poll, I think it was a Susquehanna poll out of Pennsylvania, where something like 41% of respondents said that abortion was one of I think they gave them two issues to say, these are the key issues for you. And abortion was 41% of the respondents. And I'm trying to make sense of that because the national polls are, much lower, 7, 8, 9, 10%. So, I mean, is that just like, I think Pennsylvania is relatively educated, pretty white. Like, is that like a white man's issue? Like, what am I supposed to make of that?
I don't think it's a white man's issue. I think
good point.
I think it speaks to the power of Democratic messaging, because it really must be nice to be so worried about abortion access in places that are never going to ban abortion, that you don't care that there are working people who literally cannot afford to get to work or buy groceries for their families.
Yeah.
To me, that's just a must be nice feeling. And it's a true indictment of Republicans. If people don't go into the ballot box ballot booth, thinking about the economy and all the disasters that have been visited upon regular working people by the Democrats in power, Republicans aren't worth their salt.
Well, you're an ad guy though. So how long can you run the same ad campaign before it stops working? And I'm talking like it's been the entire Biden presidency, the economy has been like totally drunk driving on the wrong side of the freeway. I mean, at some point people just get used to that, and I mean, might we just be at the place where people get used to that?
To some extent, but as an advertiser, you have to remind them. And you have to show them that it was Democratic policies and Democratic politicians who aided and abetted this.
Right.
So when Biden comes out and says, yes, essentially working people with no college debt need to subsidize college grads who out earn them, it is then the Republicans' job to reach regular people and say, this is what this is. You are being asked to subsidize post grads who are living cushy lives. And the Republicans there's that disconnect. So that's what I'm trying to do with the projects I work on, is reach regular working normie people with the reality of what the Democrats have done and that the fact that there's an alternative.
I mean, that's the place where a little creativity goes so far. I don't have you seen that ad where they go and film the auto workers and diner waitresses talking about how glad they are to be paying off gender studies degrees? And
yes, and that is a very necessary ad with one caveat. And I was very, very happy to see that ad, and it played on some MLB games or something, so it reached regular people. The one caveat is they picked 3 blue collar workers, all of whom are white. If you look at the blue collar worker percentages in the United States, at least 1/3, probably half of those people are Black or Hispanic or Asian. So to me, if I'm creating that ad, why not there's 3 characters in that ad. Make one of them Black or Hispanic or Asian, just to signal that this isn't just about, Rust Belt Trump whites. That's what pisses me off about the GOP.
So, okay, note to self and note to viewers, we're going to try and get a little snippet of one of Albert's campaigns in here that's Spanish language. But I mean, is it that simple? Is it just as simple as like, speak motherfucking Spanish, bro, and you can get some votes?
I mean, it helps. It helps to engage with people in the language. I mean, most Hispanic voters in America are English speaking predominantly.
Yes.
But it certainly helps to go on Spanish language media and show up. And it certainly helps to go on Black media, urban radio, and show up. Not that only Black people listen to that and not that Black people only listen to that, but you have to signal, especially if you're trying to create or dispute a conception of yourself that this is the party of white people, old white men. You have to proactively go ahead and hit that right up front and say, no, I'm not. Here I am in Milwaukee or Chicago or Philadelphia. Here's my campaign event. I'm gonna have a listening session with you. I'm gonna advertise on radio stations that you listen to. All this stuff matters to voters.
So I assume, like anything, that there are, people all over the country who are trying different ways to do the same thing and getting a spectrum of results. So like in your experience, is there, let's make it like cheekier or more fun. Okay, so we're going out and canvassing a district in like Orange County or someplace where there's every type of human being kind of living on the same block. Do you kind of know from your experience doing these ad campaigns, you knock on the door and you see someone's appearance, like, can you sort of tell who's going to be receptive to a kind of center right pitch and who's not going to be? Like, are there certain demos that really are easier to get traction in than others?
Yes and no. I mean, you have to allow for the element of surprise. And at the end of the day, as a conservative, like the primary unit is the individual.
Yes.
So there are people from all sorts of demographics, and it amazes me. You'll see polls of millennials or Gen Z, and 20 or 30% are voting Republican, and you're like, who are all, besides me, who are these people? Because they're really thinking for themselves. I'd love to meet every single one of them. You'd be surprised. People have all sorts of opinions, but of course, if somebody's, looking a little more like they are a working guy or gal, I'm going to be able to, in Philadelphia, engage with them in a certain way. And if they look like they have, 3 colors to their hair and they're kind of like an online progressive looking person, I'm going to not think it's going to be a fruitful conversation.
So I was interested. We just had John Ralston from Nevada on, if you're familiar with him. And I asked him this question, and I don't think any of us know the answer, but I'll ask you again. So the polls of Latinos in Nevada, like, more or less just show that they're hard to separate on paper from anyone else. If they're older they get, the more conservative they get. The more educated they get, the more liberal they get. Urban versus rural, same sorts of things. So do we just I don't know, do we have an outdated way of thinking about this? We as a people, we as in, if we were Republican pollsters, like, is the frame of reference just wrong on how this outreach happens?
Yes and no. I mean, you want to avoid pandering and tokenizing people. And I can't cite the exact statistic, but something like, 80% of the primary identity of Hispanics in America when they're polled is American.
Yes.
And that really is the American dream, right? That's what happened to Jews. That's what happened to Irish, Italians, a lot of Asians. They have become normative in America. And I think Hispanic voters believe that they are normative, and the left believes that they're people of color. And a lot of them are like, no, we're not. We're just, if you're in, Texas or Arizona, a lot of your ancestors were here before the white people were here. They've always been there. They've always been American, let's say. That is not entirely historically accurate. To your point, I mean, but at the same time, a lot of people do watch Univision. A lot of people listen to Spanish language radio, and they are all Hispanic, and they deserve to be reached on those channels. So I don't know if that really answered your question.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I sort of agree with you. I mean, I lived in LA for 8 years, and you drive by a parking lot by the beach, and it's a bunch of blue collar guys, like, looking at their cars, shining them up, like drinking beer. They just happen to be drinking Modelo's and, be of Latino, probably Mexican or Guatemalan descent, but they're exactly the same in most other ways. It's just your average blue collar, middle class person anywhere else in America.
And I will say, I wish that Republicans viewed people as people like we say we do. We always say we're the party of the individual. What matters is what's on the inside, not your external fixtures. And then we don't look like the country as a whole. So it's hard to reconcile those two things. And really, we need to build a party that's more representative so that you see that the average working person in America, whether they're Black charter school mom in Philadelphia or a plumber in the suburbs or a farmer in a rural area of Pennsylvania, they all have a lot more in common than the super highly educated sort of urban person who's Black or Hispanic or Asian or white, who were taught those are the really intractable and important characteristics. In fact, what's really important is how you're living and
Right.
your values. And most working people share similar values, and Republicans need to see that.
Right, right, right. Well, and like I don't think anyone would be surprised. Like I've always said that the demographics is destiny argument is absolute gutter trash, like defies any reasonable explanation. Because this like groups get larger, they stratify, like the tent gets bigger or it splits in half or like it's just the way things work. So,
Yeah.
it's just
And there was also hysteria in America in the 1800s when German immigrants were
right,
coming over and replacing, English and Scots.
right.
And there was places where white Catholics,
Yeah,
were not allowed to settle, and Jews and the Irish, and we have all become normative,
right,
and Hispanics are doing that as well, and that's a good thing.
right, right. Totally agree. Couldn't say it better myself. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about your home state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I don't know how involved you are in Pennsylvania elections and, gossip, but I'm going to try real hard to get something out of you here.
We'll see.
All right. So you were writing, I feel like I saw you writing about what are the two districts up there in Northeast Pennsylvania, the 8th, like Scranton, Matt Cartwright's district?
7th and 8th.
Yeah. So John Krashour, who's I think at the National Journal has this listed as one of his key races
the
too.
Axios now.
No shit. Didn't realize that.
Yeah, he's one of the best.
Yeah. Yeah, he's good. He's good. So you were writing about this, what many are saying is just the bellwether district. I think it's Jim Bouknet on the Republican side running for a second time against Matt Cartwright on Pelosi's leadership team. And the Republican gains in registration in the sort of key counties around Scranton and Wilkes-Barre are hard to ignore. Do you think, like, is there any evidence that is Latino realignment there, or is it just anyone's guess why people are registering to be Republicans in northeastern Pennsylvania?
Well, that district is fascinating. I mean, it's a very what you call ancestrally Democratic district, which when you're talking about a state like Pennsylvania, where people's grandparents and great-grandparents have maybe been in the same corner of the state for generations, your ancestral heritage in Western Pennsylvania and Northeast Pennsylvania matters. Yeah. So these are people who were working Roosevelt Democrats, or their parents or grandparents were, and they've inherited that and are still involved. But the party culturally has moved so far to the left. You go to Scranton or Wilkes-Barre and you say, should abortion be legal in the 8th month of pregnancy? Should biological men and women be, wrestling against each other in high school? They're going to side with the Republicans on that. And that has been, Green New Deal. These are energy producing areas of the country. These are areas that have not shifted culturally, whereas the Democratic Party has. So there's been a lot of attrition there. And I think those are mostly white, Irish and Italian origin people who are up there who are switching. But there is a large Hispanic community, particularly around Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which is a municipality that's about 70 or 80% Latino, mostly Dominicans who have left New York, the Bronx, and come down to Pennsylvania where it's a little quieter and cheaper. And those people are shifting to the right too. And I've done a lot of work engaging those people and making sure that they hear our message and show up, and they will flip that district.
You're confident that is a Republican pickup?
Yeah, Matt Cartwright is on, it's a progressive on Pelosi's leadership team, who's one of only a very few handful of Democrats, less than 5 Democrats who are representing a Trump-held district in 2020. He's gonna be on ice.
He's also rich and good looking.
Yeah, he is kind of good looking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people spend a lot of money on elections and they don't always win. Just look at the Democrats in the last few Senate cycles.
Right. Look at Jamie Harrison and Amy. Our listeners call it Amy McGrath, Amy McGrift, which.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Amy McGrift. That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not all about money. It's really, you have to remember, candidates really do matter, but 90% plus of people who walk into the voting booth are voting Republican or Democrat.
Right.
And that's it. That's what they know. They don't know who their state rep is. They don't really know the difference between a senator and a congressman and an attorney general and a governor. They are voting, they know they're voting Republican this cycle. And those people switch sometimes, but we want people voting Republican up and down.
Right. I guess I should just close to our followers. Jim Bouknet, who's running on the Republican side, is a person I had a personal relationship at some point with in my life. I would call him a friend. I don't know if he'd call me a friend, but he's
A
strong.
friend, but not a lover.
A friend, but not a lover. A friend, but not a lover. Well put. Well put.
That would be news.
Yeah. I know the way that came out of my mouth probably sounded a little bit weird.
Call me by your
Yeah. Call me
call
by
me
my
by
name.
your financial advisor.
There you go. Okay. So back in Pennsylvania. So polls show two things that I think are interesting, and I don't think polls are 100% fake, but sometimes they are. They say that more than 70% of Pennsylvanians think that the country is on the wrong track. So to me, that would indicate that they're not really excited about Joe Biden and what's his face, governor. Is it Governor Wolf? What's your governor's name now?
That's right.
Governor Wolf. Anyway, not super excited about these
Tom
guys.
Wolf.
Tom
Probably
Wolf.
the most milquetoast man alive.
Have you met Mark Kelly in Arizona?
No, but he does seem pretty milquetoast.
I mean, I haven't met either of them, but
He did actually go to space, though, which is more interesting than Tom Wolf.
That's true. If you've been to space, you have at least one interesting story to tell at a party.
It would be amazing if he told that story in a boring way.
Yes.
I mean, there are a lot of empty suits in politics and, scripted, boring people on both sides.
That's true. People think, let me say it this way. If Congress is representative of the American people, most people in Congress are average, just like, most human beings. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But anyway, so 70% of Pennsylvanians say that the country's on the wrong track. But Oz, who you would think, Dr. Oz, the Republican Senate candidate, you would think he would be the sort of protest vote against the country being on the wrong track. Really, really underwater, high unfavorables. What's going on? Is this just early in the election cycle to normies, so they haven't really processed any of this information? Or do you think that Oz is already in some trouble here?
Well, there's a couple things. And first, I'm going to kind of, push back a little on your framing, because Oz has been actually closed a major gap in the last few polls. And I think the more voters see about Fetterman, particularly, the less they're going to like him, because, and I'm not just saying this as a Republican campaign consultant, he is very, very left wing, very radical. His criminal justice policies are crazy. He has two people on his campaign payroll that are convicted murderers who were never exonerated. They had their sentences commuted, but they've never been found innocent. They were found guilty by a jury of their peers. So things like that are really, to me, ugly and irresponsible. And he also has had a catastrophic health event, which he is not willing to talk about. But the few clips of him are really damning. So Fetterman and the cavalry is going to come in for Oz, and I think he'll probably win it by a small margin. Possibly, although on the governor's side, we have a really poor candidate in Doug Mastriano, who has not tried to expand particularly, and will probably drag down Oz, but then Fetterman might drag down Shapiro. So it'll be kind of an interesting debate. I think there'll be some ticket splitters. So anywho, what was your question?
Who's wrong, basically? Because I feel like these two numbers can't be both true.
Okay, so I don't think Oz is that underwater. I do think, from what I understand and what I've heard from people working on these campaigns, a lot of it is that Republicans who were voting for other candidates in the primary, Kathy Barnett or Dave McCormick, have not fully come home to Oz yet. But the best solution for that will be when they learn more about Fetterman, which Republican voters are. Right. So I think a lot of those unfavorables are from Republican voters who are going to end up supporting him. And a lot of those undecideds are also from conservative leaning voters.
Yeah. So a story that we hear consistently on Star Spangled Gamblers from either people in Pennsylvania or people who are in kind of GOP Senate Inc. is that if you go to an Oz event, he's a very strong candidate. If you watch an Oz event on YouTube or read the reporting, he's a very weak candidate. Again, I don't know how those two things can be true in the modern world. So you sound like you're on the Oz is okay side.
I was very skeptical. I voted for Dave McCormick. I don't really like the, I don't like the celebrity politics thing. I don't think it worked well with Obama. I don't think it worked well with Trump.
Yeah.
But I went to see Oz in person right after the primary, and I was actually blown away by how the command of the issues was great, but even more important is he was empathetic, and he cares about people, or at least he does a good job showing that he cares. And that's something Republicans, that like piece of the emotional orchestra. Republicans don't do the empathy thing well. And I was really impressed by Oz, and I've continued to be impressed by him. I'm not always impressed by his campaign team or his strategy, but him as a person, absolutely.
As they say, Canada matters. Okay, well, my next question was going to be both Oz and Doug Mastriano, so the governor candidate from the Republican side, are in like the 25 to 30% probability of winning, if you believe betting markets. I was going to ask you which one you think is the better buy there, but it sounds like you're an Oz guy.
Oz.
Oz, indeed.
So. And I think the governor's race is more fully baked in because Mastriano has no money to advertise, and he's been defined by Shapiro. I think Shapiro's going to win it narrowly, and Shapiro's actually a good candidate, more moderate, not crazy Democrat. And then the Fetterman campaign, I think Fetterman has a lot more to lose, both because of his health issues, which are significant, and because of his radicalism, which is also significant, and the voters will be hearing more about it.
How much does it matter in like Montgomery and Delaware County that Dr. Oz looks like a haunted house? I'm sorry, that John Fetterman looks like a haunted house worker?
Gosh, I think it must matter among like sort of moderate suburban people, but for the like online progressive base of the Democratic Party, and he's like presenting as this like working collar roughneck, they absolutely live for that. And it really helps. It's amazing, actually. They're like, he's like the manifestation of all of the masculinity and grittiness that they like don't actually have in their lives, and that he actually didn't have in his life. He just dresses like it. Right.
So he is almost like Bernie bro LARPing. Like instead of going out and buying a combat shotgun and a tactical vest, they just give money to Fetterman and feel like they're big, strong men.
Yeah, or that they're champions for the working class because he like dresses in shitty clothes, even though he has an allowance from his parents.
Got it.
He's really an amazing specimen. Your listeners should just look up some of the stuff the Washington Free Beacon has reported on Fetterman. I mean, he is an amazing specimen, a very strange and bizarre and problematic person.
Well, as someone who himself is starting to get fatter than I used to be, I appreciate anyone who's overweight being called an amazing specimen. I'm going to take that as a compliment.
It's not in your face at all. It might be when you stand up, but you can't tell.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that I'm passing muster. But Fetterman has defied expectations his whole career. He's allegedly a great retail politician. That's a problem if you have mobility and speech issues, though. I mean, I guess he's got a lot of money. You know, money matters a great deal in politics.
He's raised a lot of money from, mostly out-of-state progressives who just like fangirl over candidates like this. They raise, a lot of money, but my opinion, there is the reality-based voter that does not like convicted murderers on your payroll, does not like ending life sentences for convicted serial killers and rapists, and does not like this sort of just general leftward tilt, all the economic policies, and then also might be concerned about the fact that he can't speak or articulate his ideas.
All right. So betting markets also, I'm just going to throw you some other facts and let you react. Betting markets, in a way that takes too long to explain, rank what the most competitive Senate races are going to be this year. And right now, Pennsylvania is ranked 4th behind Nevada, Wisconsin, and Georgia.
And that's closest margin?
Right. Does that feel right to you?
Pennsylvania 4th, and then go 1 through 4, go 1 through 5.
All right, hold on. I want to make sure I get this right. Second
tightest
place.
Margin.
Yeah. Tightest margin in Georgia, second tightest margin in Wisconsin, third tightest margin in Nevada. I guess now, just since we've been on this, North Carolina, maybe a poll dropped. North Carolina is in 4th, Pennsylvania in 5th, and then for comparison's sake, Arizona trailing behind in 6th place.
I would say those first 3 are going to be won by Republicans.
Georgia? Everyone's hating on what's his face, Herschel Walker.
They were a few months ago, but I actually have a lot of connections in Georgia, and Warnock does not have the same moderate profile as somebody as like Mark Kelly in Arizona. Yeah. And there have been polls showing Walker ahead by a couple points, which you don't see with a lot of Republican candidates, even those who end up winning. I think Walker's going to, and Brian Kemp is a great candidate who's going to stop Stacey Abrams. I think Walker's going to win by a couple points.
Wow. Are these polls that we can look up, or are these like internals for
No,
GOP
there's some
operatives?
externals. Maybe it was Emerson and one other in the last couple of weeks that showed Walker ahead, which is really great news for Republicans. And Georgia is not a purple state. I mean, it might be a slightly purpling state, but it's a red state. So that one I think is going to go our way. Nevada, I think, is going to go our way almost certainly. It's very, very over-indexing on Hispanic voters and non-college educated voters. And what was the number 3 one?
Wisconsin, number 2.
Again,
Yeah.
you define Barnes. He's a lot like Fetterman. I think Ron Johnson will be tight, but I think he'll win.
I think Mandela Barnes is fake news.
I think he's very radical. And people like remember what happened in Kenosha because they live there.
Right. But Georgia, I mean, maybe Herschel Walker.
By Walker and by Oz. That's what I think.
Wow. I mean, I guess like Herschel Walker maybe has the Trump thing going for him where like he's so unpredictable in what he says that people just aren't really fazed by it a little bit. Maybe like, he's just, it's just Herschel Walker being Herschel Walker.
Listen, they parachuted in the right campaign consultants this summer to right the ship. And I think that they have righted the ship from what I see.
All right.
And you have the benefit of running next to Brian Kemp.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, Oz is going to get pulled down by Mastriano. In Georgia, Walker is going to get lifted by Brian Kemp.
That's a good point. Maybe we should put him on the presidential watch list. It's been like Georgia's been too important of a state for Republicans the last 20 years to have not produced like high profile national candidates. So maybe we should become a Brian Kemp podcast.
Kemp is great. He has a pair of balls on him. And let me just say one more thing. Yeah. Georgia, the electorate is 1/3 Black.
Yeah.
If you care about reaching those Black voters who you shouldn't just be trying to win, 2/3 of the other electorate. You have to reach the Black voters too. So doing the kind of engagement work that I dedicate myself to, your listeners can go to catalystpac.us, for example, the PAC I'm running on this. This is really important to engage Black voters in Georgia.
Okay, well then let's finish and just talk once more about what you do. So if I fall off my skateboard that I don't own and I break my wrist and also dislocate my shoulder, I'm probably going to have to go to 2 different doctors. I got to go to my wrist guy and my shoulder guy because everything's subspecialty. Is voter engagement that way too? Like, do I go for you as my Hispanic guy and I go to someone else for my, Black voter outreach guy? Or like, do you have like a subspecialty here that we need to know about, or what's?
I consider myself a non-traditional Republican guy. Yeah. So that is suburban moderates, working people of color, LGBT and our allies or whatever. So anything that's outside the base is my specialty. Okay. I don't like the red meat Republican messaging. We have enough of that. We do all of that already. So anything that feels like what's going to get you to 50+1 in most places, that extra margin is what I focus on.
Okay, so if I need an ad that features immigrants crossing the Rio Grande and panic, don't go to you. Don't go to Albert.
That is a misconception and an interesting one. A lot of Hispanic voters want the border secure.
See, this is interesting.
Yeah, it's a total misconception. I mean, it's actually offensive to suggest that like you showing the flow of illegal immigrants will somehow offend people who came here legally and can vote. You know what I mean?
Okay. All right. Wow.
I mean, I wouldn't call them
it makes sense.
illegals.
It makes sense.
I wouldn't call them illegals.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Some ads do that. It's like, don't do that. Why needlessly offend people?
Okay. So if I need an ad that is me riding around in my truck in body armor and showing off my guns and shooting pictures of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, do not go to Albert. That's not your thing. Okay. None of those ads. If I need an ad that shows some like very weird faith healing, that's probably not your shtick either. But if I need an ad that is designed to grow the tent to invite more people into the metaphorical and literal party, that is when I would call Albert Eisnberg over at. What's your primary venture called? I've known you for long enough that you've had a couple, so I want to get it right.
Blue State Red is my consulting firm, and it's easy to remember because you start with the blue state and it goes red.
Amazing. It's a goal-driven, results-driven organization, if you can imagine such.
Yeah, and there's a lot of consultants that do the red meat stuff, and there's not that many that do, purple and blue areas, and that's what I do.
And also you have, for those of you who are not watching this on YouTube, you have an amazing picture of Margaret Thatcher behind you looking glamorous and powerful. And I kind of want that for myself.
And we have a new conservative woman leading Britain as of yesterday, the time of filming.
That's right. Those brutally sexist conservatives, they would never let a woman rise. What is she? She's what? Is she the second or third Conservative Party member?
The third. Thatcher, Theresa May, Liz Truss.
I love how complicated the world is. It's just
I know all of the stupid platitudes that Americans throw at each other online. It's like, go to Western Europe. You'll learn a lot.
Or just learn. And the more you learn, the more you'll realize that, your own convictions have a lot of plasticity in them. So just, chill. All right. So Albert, tell people where they can find you. And then obviously we've really enjoyed this and hope you'll come back sometime. But where can people find you?
Yeah, this was really fun. You can find me on Twitter at Alby-Delphia, like Alby, A-L-B-Y, Delphia, like Philadelphia. You can go to bluestatered.us if you want to learn about my consulting firm. And you can go to catalystpac.us if you want to support some of these innovative ads that are going to lift Republican candidates over the finish line, especially with diverse voters who we absolutely need to be reaching early and often.
All right. Albert Eisnberg.
3 methods. I should have just given one.
Yeah, that's right. One call to action, bro.
Find me on Twitter.
Yeah, find me on Twitter. Alby-Delphia. All right, Albert, thanks for joining, and we look forward to hosting you again sometime.
Thanks, Keen Dog. Good to talk to you.
La subida de precios de la comida en los supermercados, robos a mano armada en mi vecindario. Y ni siquiera estoy segura de si los ahorros de mi familia estarán aquí mañana. ¿Y de qué están hablando los demócratas? Inventando palabras como Latinx. ¿Cuáles son tus pronombres? No me interesa. Me importa que los precios de los comestibles bajen, obtener fórmula para mi hija y que mi esposo pueda llenar su tanque de gasolina para ir a trabajar. Con tantos problemas que enfrentan las familias de Pensilvania, los demócratas están atrapados en su propio mundo, no en el nuestro. Además, los demócratas son incapaces de entendernos. Pero se acercan las elecciones el martes 8 de noviembre y por primera vez voy a votar por los republicanos. Los republicanos tienen un plan para volver a encarrilar la economía, apoyar a nuestras familias y hacer que nuestros vecindarios sean seguros. Los demócratas nos abandonaron. Ahora yo los dejo a ellos. ¿Estás conmigo?